Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Pretes, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned for these upcoming MMA events. The best time to use this service is upon us as the Contender Series kicks off this week, and the best way for you to study up on each of these competitors to know what you're going to get when they step inside the cage is to utilize the MMA Fight Archive. Find out why over 85 subscribers are utilizing this service. You get a 7-day free trial to check it out for free, where you'll get access to over 4,100 fighter profiles. Yes, that is right. 4,100 and more fighter profiles for you to study from and ensure that you're getting as many direct links as possible for all of these fighters. Make sure you guys check it out. The MMA Fight Archive, link in the description below. All right. It is a pay-per-view fight week once again for the UFC, and this time they are headed down under as they host UFC 305, headlined by a middleweight grudge match for the title, as well as Dricus du Plessis looks to defend his title for the first time after winning it in January against Sean Strickland. He takes on Israel Adesanya, the former middleweight kingpin, who is looking to earn his title back for the third time, or at least win the middleweight title for the third time. Obviously, a lot of bad blood and stuff going on, a lot of politics surrounding this fight, but I thought we'd see a little bit more hype coming into this fight week, but I'm not really sensing it as of yet. Maybe we just need the press conference to take place first, and then we'll feel it, but the UFC did a decent job in terms of filling out the rest of the card with the regular oceanic talent that we see whenever they go down under. So I'm very much looking forward to this card overall. Decent betting slate. There are some good spots to fire on. There are some very chalky spots that we might want to avoid as well. But I look forward to breaking down that in total for you guys. Now, just a quick update. So Dana White Contender Series is kicking off this week. That means I will be dropping Contender Series breakdowns for you guys. Those will drop on Mondays, roughly after the weigh-ins have completed, so probably around 1 or 2 p.m. Eastern time, which means I will be pushing my MMA Lawcast episodes back for the UFC card that's going down that week to Tuesdays, hence the Tuesday release this week, just to give my content a little bit of time to breathe as well. And then top 3 lock of the night, top 3 dog of the night videos will drop on Wednesday, quick picks on Thursday, free parlay and 3 best prop bets on Friday. And then I might be adding something different on the weekends. Not so much of a fan of the media reaction show that I've been doing, not getting the traction that I expected it to, but I do have another idea for something that I want to drop on Sundays, so stay tuned for that. Also this week, we got PFL, another playoff show that they got. I hope to drop that breakdown for you guys either by Wednesday. Obviously, by Thursday latest, I should have it out for you guys, but I'll do my best to get it out on Wednesday. And there's also ACA going down, which has 18 fights scheduled. I believe that's Friday morning. Let me just quickly confirm that. ACA is August 16th, so Friday morning. I'll have written breakdowns for that on the MMALOTN Patreon page, so you guys can get access to that there. All right, quick recap on the lock of the night play for last week. Danny Barlow comes through for us. Chalky, I got him around minus 275. He closed closer to minus 350. Went to a split decision. Not sure what Jaron Villel was thinking there. At worst, that fight is 29-28 with the first 2 rounds going to Danny Barlow. Glad he ends up getting the win there, hoping he was going to get a knockout, but he goes out there and still gets the job done and looks decent with the chalky price there. So that now brings our lock of the night record to 58-28 on the year for a 67% hit rate. We're firmly in the profit once again. Hope to stay there. Hope that we don't have any more dips in a lock of the night shakiness. We'll see if we can keep that up this weekend. And then in terms of the dog of the night, I did cash on Jonata Dinez as a plus 185 underdog, but I ended up going with Marcin Tybura as my dog of the night play, and I was not expecting Sergey Spivak to pull off a submission off of his back, but considering how aggressive he seemed right as soon as he got his back on the mat, I knew that we'd be in for a bit of a rough night there, and Tybura was unable to utilize his BJJ brown belt to stay out of those submissions. I thought he would be able to. He was unable to. Spivak submits him there, and we have to rip up another dog of the night ticket. Very bad showing for the dog of the night play this year, like I said. So that now brings our dog of the night record to 26-60 on the year for a 30% hit rate. Very abysmal, very nasty, yuck. We need to dig ourselves out of that hole. Luckily, the lock of the night play is keeping us above ship here, but still got a lot of work to do in terms of the dog of the night plays. Last plug here, the main event article and 3 best moneyline spots that I drop on GodzillaWins.com. Make sure you guys check those guys out, as they're providing your boy a platform to drop written breakdowns for you guys for free. Thursdays, main event breakdown. Fridays, 3 best moneyline spots. Make sure you guys check that out. GodzillaWins.com. All right. That's a wrap on all the plugs and the intros. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the first fight of the night. We got 12 fights scheduled. A lot of Australian and New Zealand talent on this card. A lot of fun prospects to look forward to, which includes somebody in the first fight. So it takes place in the flyweight division, as we have the UFC debut of Stuart Nicoll coming in at minus 230. He goes up against Jesus Aguilar, who comes in at plus 195. Now, Stuart Nicoll is an 8-0 prospect, a champion from the Australian regional scene, and has looked pretty unbeatable in all of his fights. This guy's going out there and dominating everybody that they're putting in front of him, utilizing his grinding, grappling approach, fueled by his BJJ black belt. But we've been seeing steady improvements in his striking game, which allows us a takedown and grappling game to flow so effortlessly behind it. He does a great job in terms of controlling the back of his opponents and waiting to find that opportunity to posture up for big shots to get a ground and pound finish, or sink in that choke, sink in that submission, and get a tap from his opponents. Now, he kind of reminds me of Steve Erceg in the spot, in the aspect of they both come from Australia. Both guys look very clean in pretty much all aspects of mixed martial arts, but I was a little bit hesitant about Erceg coming into the UFC because of the lack of legitimate competition that they were able to go up against on the Australian regional scene. And that's the same concern here, or qualms that I have with Stuart Nicoll. Everything on tape looks amazing. Can he translate that to the UFC level? Steve Erceg has been able to do so, and Stuart Nicoll looks like he has all the chops to do the exact same thing as well. So I'm very much looking forward to his UFC debut this weekend and seeing if he can bring that domination from the regional scene into his first fight in the UFC. He's going up against a tough guy here in Jesus Aguilar, who is an underdog in his last matchup against Matias Mendonça and pulled off a very close split decision victory. I believe it was a split decision over Mendonça. Very, very close fight. A lot of people expecting it to be on the Mendonça side. As a backer of Aguilar, obviously I was happy once the decision was read, but going into the decision being read, I didn't feel too good about it, but Aguilar ends up getting the hometown rub there and getting his hand raised in Mexico City. He's a tank of a man, just loves to throw with a lot of power, not a whole lot of technique, and he has a very nasty guillotine choke that he can apply on his opponents if they shoot desperation takedowns. But he is easy to take down. He is easy to pick apart in the striking realm as well, but he does need to be respected in terms of his finishing abilities. Like I said, the guillotine choke and a lot of big power in his hands, just as we saw when he knocked out another Australian fighter in Shannon Ross within 17 seconds of their matchup taking place. In terms of this matchup here, I do lean to the Nicoll side. Again, I think he is technically the superior fighter in pretty much every aspect of MMA against Aguilar, but you do have to respect the power of Aguilar and finishing threat that he brings to the table. The other aspect, like I said, Nicoll's lack of experience against legitimate opponents. Luckily for him, Aguilar isn't one of the top guys in the flyweight division. This is the perfect way to kind of introduce him to the UFC fan base and for him to go out there to potentially find a finish as well. So I'm actually going to go with Nicoll. Nicoll by maybe club and sub, but I do think that we'll see Nicoll pretty much dominate the majority of this fight and ending up finishing Aguilar within 2 or 3 rounds. All right, next up, we got a welterweight matchup here between Song Kanan coming in at minus 170, going up against Ricky Glenn, who comes in at plus 145. Now, starting off on the Song side of things, he did have a tremendous performance against Rolando Bedoya, and that was a fight where he had a slow start, but managed to put it together in the second and third rounds, where he was able to batter Bedoya and win that fight on the scorecards. That showcased how Song can actually be successful in his fights when he's able to get into a groove with his striking, utilize that technical approach, and really batter his opponents down the pipe with the stinging power that he brings to the table. His defensive grappling is definitely improving, and that's where opponents have been able to really cause him issues in the past. But when he can get in the zone with his striking, it's very difficult to disrupt his rhythm and really difficult to try to take him to the mat. One thing that's been very weird about his preparations in recent fights is the fact that he seems to change training camps every single time. That fight leading up to the Rolando Bedoya fight, I believe he was training out of Killcliff FC. The fight after that against Kevin Juice, I believe he was training out of Bangtown Muay Thai. And in the preparation for this matchup, it seems like he's been mixing it up over there at Tiger Muay Thai, and he's also been getting some training in with Li Jingliang and the rest of those guys over there in China. But one thing we always know we're going to get from Song: solid striking, stinging punching power, and if he can get his game going, he's going to be difficult to deal with. We saw him unable to get his game going against Kevin Juice, allowing Juice to just pretty much outstrike him and outwork him over the course of 15 minutes and clean sweeping Song on the scorecards. Let's see if he can get it back into rhythm this weekend against Ricky Glenn, who is a true veteran of the game. You're talking about a guy who is 35 years old, but on a very rough run as of late. We're talking about 1-3-1 over his last 5 fights, currently riding a 2-fight losing streak, but both of those losses coming by devastating knockout. He is a guy that struggled a lot with staying active inside the cage, specifically due to injuries that he's dealt with. I believe he's had some back issues, some neck issues, just bad injuries that he's trying to recover from and try to get back into the UFC and try to, tap into the prime years that he still has at the highest level of the sport. But I think its durability is very difficult to have confidence in, especially when he's going up against other power punchers. Normally, Glenn is a guy that likes to weaponize his cardio, moving forward and really putting guys through the pressure and the just grind with that pace that he likes to keep. And on the ground, he has some decent jiu-jitsu off of his back, although the majority of his finishes have come by strikes when he is able to finish his opponents. This guy does very good, especially in deep waters, but like I said, considering the recent showing of what his durability looks like, his inability to take big shots, it's very tough to have much confidence coming into this matchup against a power puncher like Song Kanon. Now, Song is a guy that is better suited to back as an underdog more than a favorite. He, as we saw in the Kevin Juice fight, if he's unable to get into his rhythm early, he usually starts to fall behind and is usually succumbing to his opponents taking over and pulling away later on in matchups. And Ricky Glenn is more than capable of doing that here. It's just tough to have uber confidence on the Glenn side of things, knowing how hard Song can hit and knowing that if Song ends up connecting, that could be the end of the night for Ricky Glenn. So I see the arguments for Glenn. I see why people would want to back him as an underdog in this spot. I think as an overall mixed martial artist, he's actually better than Song Kanon. But if it comes to the striking and if Glenn is unable to get his game going, he's going to get hit. He's going to get hit often, and he's probably going to get knocked out. But again, Song, not a guy that I'd be overly confident in, especially at this chalky price. But I will still pick him to win this matchup and win it by knockout. Our next matchup, we got a pretty lopsided match here, and Tom Nolan coming in as a minus 1150 favorite in this lightweight matchup, going up against Alex Reyes, who comes in at plus 750. Now, obviously, Tom Nolan came in from the Contender series, and he did a great job of dispatching his opponent pretty quickly there. He did manage to, he fell short in his UFC debut, where he got knocked out by Nicolas Mota, where he started off very hot. He utilized his range, utilized his striking from distance, but once Nicolas Mota was able to close the distance and get off on the counter strikes, he landed cleanly on Nolan and ended up putting him out there. So it was unfortunate for Nolan to suffer his first professional loss at that point. However, at somebody who is that young, 24 years old, suffering a loss that early in their UFC career, usually ends up meaning something good because they're able to learn from it and get better moving forward and realize that they're not really an invincible fighter that needs to be a little bit more cautious about the striking defense, especially when they start getting into a flow state of their own. Now, he almost fumbled the bag once again last time around where he knocked out Victor Martinez, but that did not come without some adversity, as he did actually get hurt and dropped in that round as well after having a solid first 2 minutes. Luckily for him, he was able to work his way back to his feet after cutting Victor Martinez with a nasty elbow from the bottom position. But once he got back to his feet, he got back to that nasty knee up the middle, and that allowed him to land that big shot against Martinez to the body, crumpling Martinez immediately and getting the TKO finish from there. Nolan is massive at 6'3" with a 73-inch reach at lightweight, and that's going to be hard for a lot of opponents to deal with, especially especially with how nasty his striking is. He throws in solid combinations, and whenever opponents try to close the distance, he does a great job in terms of countering their movement and that forward momentum with a big knee up the middle, as we've seen him crumple plenty of opponents in the past. His defensive grappling is slowly improving, but that's something that will be interesting to see if fighters can actually take advantage of and try to wear him out by laying on top of him and draining him of his energy. But until opponents are able to get him there, that's still a big question mark in my opinion. But still very, very dangerous. His opponent, Alex Reyes, is looking to buck this 2-fight losing streak that he's currently on, but it's been very difficult for him to do so. He's 37 years old. In his last fight, he came back from a 6-year hiatus from mixed martial arts, dealing with a plethora of injuries. And then he ended up being fed to a guy in Charlie Campbell who knocked him out 3 minutes into that matchup. Very, very bad knockout. It was a barrage of shots that Campbell ended up landing on him. And then it was this nasty 3-piece combination that he landed to crumple Reyes and eventually put him away. Reyes, I think the sport has really passed him by. On the regional scene, he was beating up scrubs and tomato cans, and now coming over to the UFC, getting knocked out by both of his opponents, Mike Perry the first time around, and then last time against Charlie Campbell. I think he's kind of just fighting out his UFC contract at this point in time, and he'll probably hang up the gloves if he ends up losing once again this weekend. And I expect that to be the difference, or actually, I expect that to be the result this weekend. But given the super chalky price on Nolan and all of his props, pretty much, you're talking about minus 350 on the under 1.5, minus 425 on Tom Nolan by knockout. This fight's pretty much unbettable. I would not parlay a minus 1,000 or better, considering banana peel issues that could end up springing itself on mixed martial arts, which is a very volatile sport considering what goes into it, but I'd be very surprised if Tom Nolan ends up fumbling the bag here and loses to a guy like Alex Reyes. Give me Nolan by knockout, probably even Nolan in round 1. All right, moving on to the featherweights here. We got Jack Jenkins coming in at minus 800 in this featherweight matchup, going up against Herbert Burns, who comes in at plus 550. Now we're seeing the return of Jack Jenkins here after he injured his arm very badly last year against Chepe Mariscal in a fight where he had a very solid first round. Unfortunately, we saw Chepe get to that judo in the second round, and that caused Jenkins to try to post on one of his arms while he was being taken down, and that snapped his arm almost immediately, and he's been on the sidelines ever since. At 31 years old, Jenkins is a very solid prospect still, who does a great job in terms of mixing the martial arts. He's a very slick striker who loves to utilize that calf kick to hurt his opponents, slow them down, and then follow up with big strikes afterwards, and he can also mix it up on the ground if he needs to. I don't think he's fully achieved his potential as of yet. He's had some good wins in the UFC so far, most notably over Jamal Emmers, and I think this is a guy that's still a guy that can do some big things in the featherweight division if he can get back to being a little bit more active, obviously needing time off because of that arm injury, and then putting together some solid wins and accruing even more experience. Luckily for him, he has a pretty easy matchup against him this weekend in Herbert Burns, who's on a 3-fight losing streak and is probably one of the worst gas bags we've ever seen in the UFC. Maybe outside of Darius Flowers as well. But Herbert Burns is a guy that after the 4th minute of a fight, he clearly starts to slow down. It was hilarious watching him in his fight against Julio Arce last time around, which it wasn't a seriously action-packed first round, but he did end the fight or end that round on his back. And once the horn blew, you see him kind of struggling to get back to his feet, putting his hands on his hips right away. And you just know in the second round, Julio Arce was going to turn up the volume and eventually get Burns out of there. And all 3 of Burns' losses in the UFC have come in the second round, mostly due to exhaustion. This guy usually goes balls to the wall early in his fights, very aggressive with his Muay Thai, has big power, as we saw when he knocked out Nate Landwehr back in 2020. Has aggressive jiu-jitsu, just as we saw when he submitted Evan Dunham. But if he's unable to get the job done early, usually he falls off heavily in terms of his productivity and ends up coming up short against his opponents. And I expect that to happen once again here in with this fight against Jack Jenkins. Now, Jenkins is not this crazy finisher that just seeks to finish at all times, nor was Julio Arce, and Arce was able to get him out of there in the second round. And it starts to get shaky when you want to look at the total here, which is currently set at 1.5 and minus 115, minus 110 both ways. I might take a little bit of a gamble here and hope that Jenkins turns up the volume early and we get an early finish here within the first 7.5 minutes. So I'll definitely take a little bit of a shot on the under 1.5. Obviously, minus 800, prohibitive favorite. Very tough to get behind backing Jenkins, even in a parlay, considering the aggressive and threatening nature that Herbert Burns usually presents early. So I'd rather go with violence more than anything in this matchup, but I still do expect Jenkins to end up getting his hand raised. Also, on a side note, Jenkins, round 2 prop on Bet Online, currently sits at plus 550. Everybody and their mother seems to be on that spot. It would be hilarious if Jenkins actually ends up finishing it in the first round instead. But regardless, my action will likely be the under 1.5 here. I'll wait for it to be a little bit more widely available before I officially tip it, but that's going to be where my head's at for this matchup. I'm going to go Jenkins. I think Jenkins finishes Burns, maybe knocks him out. Should be an easy fight for him. Again, sweaty early. Herbert Burns is dangerous. We got to give him that credit. But if Jenkins can avoid that big power, he should be able to eventually put a pace on Burns and get him out of there. All right, next up, women's flyweight matchup here as we have Casey O'Neill coming in at plus 125, going up against Luana Santos, who comes in at minus 145. Now, we'll start off on the Casey O'Neill side of things, who's 9-2 as a professional, and 2 of those losses are currently in the midst of the 2-fight losing streak that she's in. She lost to Jennifer Maia coming back from that ACL surgery that she had that kept her out of competition after that Roxanne Modafferi fight. We saw Maia utilize a veteran-style striking approach, a lot of movement, a lot of mistiming, misdirections, a lot of just crashing the pocket whenever O'Neill was not expecting it, and that caused O'Neill to get behind on the scorecards. Then the Ariane Lipski fight. Lipski battered her in the first round, dropped her in the second round, and eventually found that armbar and forced the tap out of O'Neill. It's been very difficult for O'Neill, the 26-year-old, to try to get that momentum that she had coming into the UFC, and she's changed up training camps. She was originally training out of Extreme Couture and now finds herself down in Arizona at Fight Ready MMA. Usually that camp headed by my guys, Santino DeFranco and Eddie Cha, usually do a great job in terms of helping guys revitalize their career and try to get them back on the winning track. So that is a great move for her, especially if she wants to improve her striking game, which is where she seems to have a lot of issues. She mainly looks to bully her opponents with her size and her physicality, looking to drown opponents on the mat and then just smash them from that top position. And it worked to a certain extent. But when that wrestling does not start to pay off, she's going to be forced to strike with a lot of opponents, and she really needs to tighten up her defenses and her striking, technically speaking, so that she can be competitive when fights end up taking place in the striking range. She's still young enough to be making these improvements. She still has some solid potential, but I would like to see those technical improvements first before I am truly confident in her picking up a dub. She's going up against Luana Santos here, who's 8-1. I believe she's on a 5-fight winning streak. Her lone defeat came to PFL fighter Jenna Bishop, who was able to drag her to the mat and just completely swarm her with her BJJ black belt and just keep her on the mat. But since then, Santos has done a great job in terms of improving her defensive grappling. She's a BJJ black belt. She's a judo black belt as well. We saw her utilize both of those disciplines last time around as she submitted Maria Agapova in July, utilizing a big judo throw, eventually working to the back, and then eventually taking the armbar, I believe it was. It was a rear naked choke. I believe it was rear naked choke. I don't know why the submission is escaping me at this point in time, but it was great work from her to just pretty much dominate Agapova from jump there. Santos, on the regional scene, has really looked to take her grapple-heavy approach to try to keep opponents on her back. But as of late, we've been seeing her rely on her striking a little bit more to really touch up her opponents. She even finished Juliana Miller on the feet. In the Stephanie Egger fight, she used a clinch-heavy approach and really roughed up Egger in the clinch there. Santos actually missed weight for that matchup, and that fight also took place at 135 pounds. So you wonder, what issues she was leaning on there. But she is really a flyweight. Now, she is taking this fight on short notice, having to fly halfway across the world to, or not even halfway, probably all the way across the world to take this matchup. So you have to keep an eye on what her weight cut is going to look like going into this matchup and how that could potentially impact her cardio in deeper water as well. But technically speaking, I do think she is the better fighter here compared to Casey O'Neill. O'Neill could have success being the the stronger woman between the two, and I think that could end up being a difference maker here. But I think that we'll see very strong rounds from Santos early, and I think the technical advantages from her will allow her to keep O'Neal in bad positions and could potentially open up another submission opportunity for Luana Santos here. So the cardio and short notice aspect and factors of this fight gives me some pause on the Santos side, but I still believe she can come out on top, and more than likely by submission. I think I saw her submission proper on that plus 600 range. Might take a little bit of a nibble there, but I do think Santos ends up getting her hand raised. Just not so hot on that minus 145 line. All right, next up, this one should be a bit of a barn burner if it plays out the way that I expected it to. But we got Joshua Culibao coming in at minus 135, going up against Ricardo Ramos coming in at plus 115 in this featherweight matchup. Now, both these guys are riding 2-fight winning streaks. For Culibao, it's a loss to Lerone Murphy and then a split decision loss to Danny Silva. Close fight with Danny Silva. I thought we saw Culibao have a solid first round after getting hurt within the opening seconds of that fight, but managed to win the rest of the round. The second round, he was a little bit too lackadaisical, allowing Danny Silva to have too much control time up against the cage while he roughed him up in that position as well. Culibao had a solid start to that second round, but ended up having it get pretty much lost in the control and damage that Silva was implementing, which is why two judges ended up scoring that second round in Silva's favor. And then in the third round, Silva did a great job in terms of keeping his foot on the gas, staying in Culibao's face, and landing big shots, which obviously had that round scored in his favor. Now, Culibao is normally a guy that likes to get into gritty matchups and push the pace himself to try to break his opponents and try to finish them later on. So it's very weird to see him succumb to that style that Danny Silva was bringing to the table. And I think it had more so to do with the technical advantages that Silva had in the striking realm, and Culibao unable to muster up much of a momentum of his own. He's had some solid wins. Started, I believe, his UFC career. Actually, he had that loss to Jalen Turner, then bounced back with three straight wins, and now finds himself on a 2-fight losing streak. He's a solid fighter, gritty fighter, durable fighter. But you have to wonder whether the technical advantages of his opponents will end up being the reason he does not stick around in the UFC for too long. And Ricardo Ramos will definitely have some technical advantages, but we've seen some very shaky performances from Ramos as of late, specifically over his last two fights over Charles Jourdain and Julian Erosa, where he got guillotined by both guys. You're talking about a high-level BJJ black belt getting caught in one of the simpler chokes to get out of, but we have to credit Jourdain and Erosa, who really have, tight bites on these chokes and usually are able to get their opponents to submit. We saw Julian Erosa last time around submit Christian Rodriguez, who has showcased nothing but stellar submission defense throughout his career, and then for some reason ends up getting caught by Rosa and getting submitted there. Ramos, BJJ black belt, like I said, has a solid striking game. I think he does his best work when he's able to drown opponents on the mat, just as we saw him do against Bill Algeo. We saw him have some solid success against Danny Chavez. He's a solid fighter, and he's still only 29 years old. So he could definitely be making some improvements to try to change the trajectory of his career, especially on this 2-fight losing streak. But I question his ability to thrive in wars, or when guys are trying to push the pace on him and stay in his face and just make it difficult and frustrating for him. And Culibao is a guy that is more than capable of doing that to him. I just don't trust Culibao as the favorite in this spot. I don't trust, especially what we saw from him in his last fight against Danny Silva. And then it's even harder to get behind Ricardo Ramos, who's just finding himself in these bad spots, allowing opponents to kind of dictate the pace and him falling behind in those spots. And this seems like a spot where Culibao could absolutely dictate the pace and just take the fight away from Ramos. But I just don't feel good about taking that price here. Very low confidence here. I am going to go Culibao. I'm going to go Culibao by decision. But I'm hoping this is a bittersweet fight for me where Ricardo Ramos actually ends up getting his hand raised and showcases that he still has some potential to achieve, the high standard that a lot of people had for him when he originally came into the UFC roster. But the prediction is going to be Culibao and Culibao by decision. All right, next up, we got heavyweights throwing down here as we have Junior Tafa coming in at minus 135, going up against Walter Walker coming in at plus 115. Now, both these guys obviously have much more famous brothers that compete in the UFC. We got Justin Tafa and obviously Johnny Walker. And now both these guys are trying to make a name for themselves in the UFC as well. We'll start off on the Tafa side of things, who's 1-2 through his 3 UFC fights. but does really not look like a UFC level fighter, in my opinion. Comes from a striking background, but it was hilarious to see him have his lead leg butchered within a minute of his fight against Rogerio de Lima, as it seemed he had no idea how to check those kicks that were coming his way. In his fight against Parker Porter, I was backing Porter, and there was a very significant moment where Porter was close to landing a takedown, and Tafa had a clear fence grab that stopped the takedown from being completed. It probably would not have gone Tafa's way, or there is a possibility that Tafa could have survived that ground attack and eventually got back to his feet and knocked out Porter. But I think that changed the trajectory of the fight significantly, and that allowed Tafa to utilize the striking advantage and knock out Parker Porter. But we saw Usman put a pace on Tafa that Tafa was unable to keep up with. His takedown defense is bad. His striking defense very questionable. Clearly, he has some power in his shots, but that's really where the buck stops for him. I don't think he was experienced enough on the regional scene before getting signed to the UFC, but that could also show you the lack of depth that these higher weight classes have. Light heavyweights, heavyweights. If you get a couple wins on the regional scene, more than likely you can find yourself in the UFC, and that's pretty much what Justin Tafa had going for him, especially with his connection to his brother. That's what Junior Tafa had going for him, and a lot of that probably could be accredited to his relationship with his brother, Justin. Now his opponent, Walter Walker, came into the UFC with an 11-0 record, some decent wins on the regional scene before getting signed to the UFC, and then he laid an egg against Lucas Dresky in his UFC debut earlier this year. He had a solid first round, but I felt like he was a little bit too lackadaisical, which is why judges ended up scoring that round in Dresky's favor. The second round, clearly Dresky's round, where he was landing the better strikes. But then in the third round, we saw Walker showcase some good things in terms of being able to battle back into a fight that it seemed the momentum was slipping through his fingers. And he had a very dominant third round. Unfortunately, it was not enough to get a 10-8 to at least get that fight into a decision. But he is a fighter that normally thrives from being able to take his opponents to the ground and smashing them from that top position. Striking, not all that bad, but once he is able to establish that top control, he's very difficult to deal with, especially with the power that he brings from that ground and pound that he can bring to the table. In this matchup against Tafa, I'm very surprised that Walker is the plus 115 favorite. We've seen Junior Tafa's ground game, and it is not that good. His takedown defense is horrible. His get-ups even worse, and I think Walker can absolutely put him to the grind on the mat. Walker has solid durability and a good enough chin to at least be competitive in the striking round with Tafa, but I think this fight will be won and lost on the ground, and I fully expect Walker to get him to the ground and grind him out with relative ease here. Plus 115 is a gift of a line. Again, mystified. I wouldn't be surprised if Walker ends up finishing this week and closing as the favorite, but I do like Walker a good deal here, and I think he wears out Tafa from that top position and eventually either ground and pounds him or submits him. I love Walker in this spot, and I think he absolutely smashes Junior Tafa. All right, next up, this is a very, very fun welterweight matchup between returning Li Jingliang, who comes in at plus 280, going up against Carlos Prates, who comes in at minus 340. It's been a long road back for Li Jingliang, who makes his first appearance in nearly 2 years. He's been on the sidelines dealing with a very bad spine injury, and that's very concerning, considering that he is now 36 years old and has been away from action as long as he has. He's currently on he's been alternating wins and losses pretty much over his last 5 fights, most recently losing a split decision to Daniel Rodriguez in a fight that a lot of people expected him to actually win and should have won. It was very surprising that he did not get his hand raised that weekend, and D-Rod was able to get that win. Jingliang, a power striker, loves to put the pressure on his opponents to try to find that knockout. Not the most technical fighter, has a decent grappling game, although he can be grappled or out-grappled himself. But like I said, he always gives himself a chance to win, considering the power that he usually brings to the table. He has a lot of knockout power. That is something that needs to be overstated here. But as we've seen from guys like Hamza Chimaev and Neil Magny and even Jake Matthews back in the day, if guys can put a grappling and grinding pace on him, Magny went with the clinch. Chimaev went with the grappling. Jake Matthews went with the grappling. That's how you're able to get the better of Jing Liang. But again, he's really up against it here with that long layoff that he's coming off of. A spine injury is nothing to just completely overlook. Sure, the odds might be way out of whack in this spot, but you have to give some credence to the experience that Jing Liang has had over his 10 plus years with the UFC. Not to mention the level of opponent that he's been facing this entire time. But 36 years old and coming off of a spine injury, that's tough to have confidence behind. Although plus 280 makes it a little bit easier to part ways with your money there. His opponent, Carlos Prates, has been very clean as of late, riding a 9-fight winning streak, 2 of those coming inside the UFC, knocking out Trevin Giles, and most recently Charles Radke. This guy is a nasty Muay Thai kickboxing specialist who does a great job in terms of not getting overzealous and just waiting for these knockouts to come to him. He does a great job in terms of establishing his range, utilizing his kicks up the middle, and just maximizing his distance management so that he can really keep opponents at bay and just touch them up. He has a very nasty knee up the middle as well, and his takedown defense has tremendously improved, which allows him to keep fights in the striking realm, and then he can just go to work with his handiwork. A lot of his opponents have been looking to take him to the ground, but have been unsuccessful in doing so. He was also very experienced even before coming onto the Contender series, which makes me believe he was more than UFC ready when the call finally came. And the UFC is clearly giving him his flowers here, considering that he's going up against the guy in Li Jingliang, who was often a ranked welterweight when he was very active. He'll be turning 31 on the day of this fight, and I think that will see him really coming into his own, showcasing he's the better technical striker here against Jing Liang. Although minus 340 is very hard to get behind, especially when he's going up against somebody as experienced as Jing Liang. Prates much closer to his prime than Jing Liang is, not to mention has been way more active over the last 2 years, while Jing Liang has been recovering from injury. I'm still going to lean Prates. Li Jingliang is going to be tough to put away, so I expect this fight to end up going to the scorecards. I'm going to go Prates. I'm going to go Prates by decision, but a Li Jingliang knockout would not at all surprise me, so I'd be careful in terms of indulging in that chalky spot on Prates. All right, next up, Tai Tuivasa coming in at plus 185 in this heavyweight matchup, going up against Jairzinho Rozenstruik, who comes in at minus 220. Now start off on the Tuivasa side, who's on a 4-fight losing streak. Things have not been good for him ever since he's knocked out Derek Lewis way back in the day. Now, knockout losses to Sirogan, Sergey Pavlovich, and then back-to-back submission losses to Alexander Volkov and Marcin Tybura have really put Tuivasa behind the ball. This is a guy that seems to be a little bit more involved with the business ventures in his life. I believe he's, for the full time now, moved up to Abu Dhabi or Dubai. And I believe that he's more so involved with, creating his own beer company and doing all these other investment opportunities that he's had. And it seems to me that he's mainly fighting for the cash now and just hoping that he can build up a little bit more of a portfolio so that when he does decide to hang it up, he has some solid safety net to fall back on. And credit to him, Dana just says it all the time. Mixed martial arts is pretty much an opportunity-based career, and it's not something that somebody can do for years and years and go into their retirement thinking they're going to be well off, especially a guy of Tuivasa's level who we know is not going to be a champion. So credit to him for focusing on those things. But that's clearly going to take away from his performances when he does step inside the cage. He'll always have the nuclear option with the big power he brings to the table and the obvious leg kicks that he likes to implement against his opponents. But he's just knockout or bust at this stage in his career. I think the best we saw of him was when he won a decision victory over Andrei Arlovsky many years back. We're not going to get that Tuivasa anymore. This is a guy that's going to be looking to throw down in the pocket, maybe land a few leg kicks, and then try to throw an overhand and try to knock his opponents out. That's it. He's going up against a far superior technical striker here in Jairzinho Rozenstruik, who had a very clean performance over Shamil Gadziev earlier this year, where he defeated him by, I believe it was 4th round TKO after Gadziev was unable to answer the bell. He utilized a very nasty jab down the pipe, did a great job in terms of keeping Gadziev at range, following up with some power shots as well. I've kind of harped on him in the past in terms of not being too active or throwing enough volume, but he does a good job in terms of making his volume count when he does throw it. He has nasty power. He has some decent kicks of his own, but it's really his jab that makes it difficult for his opponents to get into much of a rhythm. I'd be very surprised if Tuivasa is able to land a clean enough shot to put Rozenstruik out here. I think we'll see Rozenstruik pretty much control the pace of this fight, control where it takes place, how fast it takes place, and then eventually we'll see Rozenstruik land those big shots. Maybe it comes from a counter, but I think he ends up knocking out Tuivasa here and making it look relatively easy. I don't mind the chalk on Rozenstruik here. I get it's heavyweights. I get it's one shot can change everything, but I feel, stylistically and technically speaking, Rozenstruik is far superior to Tai Tuivasa. So give me Rozenstruik and Rozenstruik by knockout. All right, lightweight matchup here. Very fun fight here between Mateusz Gamrot coming in at minus 330, going up against Dan, the Hangman Hooker, coming in at plus 275. Now we'll start off on the Gamrot side of things, who's currently riding a 3-fight winning streak after losing that matchup to Beneil Dariush a couple years back. But Gamrot's been trying to stay active, trying to get back into the top of the division, just as we saw him against Arman Tsarukyan. He was maybe a fight or two away from fighting for the title, but now he's trying to build up the momentum once again. Obviously, his fighting style doesn't really bring the most eyeballs. He loves to just grapple his opponents and try to grind them out. He does such a great job in terms of just picking up the lead leg of his opponent and transitioning that and chaining that into other wrestling attempts. His striking, not a whole lot of substance there. He's mainly looking to just fill the gaps of eventually when he tries to latch onto his opponents and try to get them to the ground. American Top Team has done a great job in terms of sharpening his wrestling skills and ensuring that he can maintain control when he gets his opponents to the ground. Not often do you see him finishing his opponents. I know there's a KO there beside that Rafael Fazia fight that he had, but we all remember that was due to an injury. But still very impressive, 24-2 record. That loss to Guram Kutateladze, close fight, could have gone his way anyway. The Dariush fight was a tough one for him to get off on. But he's a guy that's going to be tough to deal with it because of his relentless wrestling style and keeping opponents in bad spots. Now, if anyone's going to force him to fight, it's going to be a guy like Dan Hooker, who has finally gotten back into his groove, now on a 2-fight winning streak, most recently having that victory over Jalen Turner, where he got hurt badly a few times, but managed to rally back in a lot of those rounds. And even in that second round, if he had a few more seconds on the clock, he likely would have gotten the tap from Jalen Turner there, but he still managed to do enough to get his hand raised on the scorecards. Hooker is a badass. This guy is an absolute savage that just loves to push the pressure, loves to utilize his striking approach, and loves to create chaos. It's going to be tough for him to do that here against Gamrot. Now, Hooker has a very solid submission game in his own right, so that's something that we could potentially see him leaning on here, looking to catch Gamrot, slacking in certain spots. Maybe we're looking to set up a dart stroke or a guillotine or try to get the back and try to get a submission going. But I think we'll see Gamrot's scrambling ability keep him safe in most of these spots and keep Hooker on the defensive. My qualm in terms of trying to be overly confident in Gamrot here at minus 330 is if Hooker actually lands damage while he's defending, because that would definitely sway the judges in Hooker's favor, as judges have often started leaning more so on damage than control. And Hooker is a guy that's going to be looking at damage no matter what position that he's in. So Gamrot's going to have to really maintain and obtain solid dominant positions to keep Hooker on the defensive while trying to land damage of his own. But that's not really a whole lot of Gamrot's game. It's a lot more holding than damaging. So I can understand anybody looking to back Hooker here, considering the line that he's at. What I'd be looking more so to target is probably the Gamrot by decision. If it's, plus 100 or better, I might take a bit of it, a nibble on that. But at minus 330, I want no action there. I want nothing to do with that. I think he wins. I think his grappling is going to be too much for Hooker, but the line is just too wide considering the narrow margin that could potentially decide this fight and the damage that Hooker ends up getting off. But the official prediction will be Gamrot and Gamrot by decision. All right, co-main event here. I really wish that this was a 5-round flyweight number one contender fight, but We get 3 rounds nonetheless. And it's not often that you see 2 high-level Australian fighters going at each other, but that's what we got here, as we have Kai Kara-France coming in at plus 135, going up against Steve Erceg, who comes in at minus 155. Now, we'll start off on the Kara-France side, who's on a 2-fight losing streak, although I think many can agree that he should have won that fight against Amir Albazi. A couple wayward scorecards ends up giving it to his opponent, and now we see Kara-France on a 2-fight losing streak. Now, that first loss to Brandon Moreno was an interim title fight that he lost by a body kick that was perfectly placed by Moreno and crumpled Kara-France. But Kara-France is a guy, 31 years old, 35 fights of experience, still a high-level flyweight that would be difficult to defeat for a lot of opponents. I think the best version of Kara-France that we saw was his performance against Askar Askarov in a fight where he did a great job in terms of stopping the takedowns of Askarov and then absolutely battering him on the feet with the striking advantage that he held there. That's what Kara-France's game is mainly built upon, is his power striking approach. It may not be the most technical, but he does a great job in terms of using his speed and explosiveness to get to the target to land that power. And that's how he has been so successful, especially at 125 pounds, where you don't see often fighters finishing their opponents. But Kara-France is a guy that's been able to do so. His defensive grappling clearly improved enough, like I said, from that Askarov fight. It's just him going out there and trying to be a little bit more assertive with that power and trying to actually land it to end fights and keep judges out of the equation. Now, his opponent this weekend, Steve Erceg, is coming off one of the more heartbreaking losses that we've seen as of late. His last fight was for the title against Alexandre Pantoja back in May, a fight that not a lot of people thought Erceg deserved, but there weren't many options out there for the UFC to lean on. Thus, Erceg got the shot, and he did a great job in a fight that was likely 2-2 going into the final round. But for some goddamn reason, he kept engaging in the grappling with Pantoja when the vast majority of success from Erceg was coming from his striking and stopping the takedowns that were coming his way. It was clear Pantoja was slowing down, but once Pantoja gets into grappling situations, it seems like he hits another gear, and that's exactly what happened in the 5th round of that fight. I think Erceg is still kicking himself, knowing that he was just 1 round away from winning the title, and he just gave it up by grappling a little bit too much. And I think that will be a great learning experience for him as he comes into trying to climb the ladder once again and get a rematch against Pantoja, or at least fight whoever ends up being the next champion by the time he gets there. Erceg, BJJ black belt, but his striking is so technical, precise, and nasty, and he does a great job in terms of implementing that reach that he brings to the table. His height, the straight shots down the pipe, he launches it with such speed. His defensive grappling, very high level. Even though Pantoja had him in some bad spots, he did a great job in terms of stopping the submissions that were coming his way, and he did a great job in terms of keeping Pantoja from getting to too many dominant positions. Even in past fights, when he has been taken down, he immediately does the small things that are needed to eventually work back to his feet and then get back to doing what he does best, and that's usually putting pressure on his opponents, landing those strikes down the pipe, and putting up good volume. This is going to be a good matchup for Erceg to prove that he deserves to be at the top of the flyweight division, and I think that this is a favorable matchup for him. Now, earlier in the week, we saw him closer to minus 225, minus 230. A lot of love coming in on Kai Kara-France to bring that line down to minus 155, and I'm more than happy to take a shot on Erceg here, as I think he is the more complete fighter compared to Kara-France. To me, Kara-France needs to land big shots and drop Erceg multiple times in this fight to end up getting his hand raised, whereas I think Erceg is going to be the one landing the shots down the pipe. I believe Kara-France actually has a 1-inch reach advantage here, but Erceg does have a 4-inch height advantage, and that could allow him kind of see the shots that are coming and do a great job in terms of countering Kara-France down the pipe, whereas Kara-France is a little bit more wide and winging with the shots when he tries to crash the pocket. I also wouldn't be surprised if we see Erceg try to jump on the back of Kara-France, try to get his grappling going. And even though the defensive grappling of Kara-France has improved, we still do see him give up some positions like we saw in that 3rd round against Amir Albazi. And I think if Erceg mixes the martial arts well enough, he can get those positions himself and showcases that his jiu-jitsu is very high level, and his ability to control his opponents and find those close positions to maintain top control, get the back of Kara-France and control him there. That's possible as well. But even if this fight ends up taking place in the striking realm, I think Erceg could end up getting the better of it with the elbows and knees that he likes to land, but more specifically, those straight shots down the pipe whenever Kara-France tries to crash the pocket. So give me Erceg by decision, maybe Erceg by submission it is possible, but I'm going to go with decision here. But even his money line at minus 155 is a great way to take a shot on Steve Erceg. All right. Main event grudge match here for the middleweight championship. We got Dricus du Plessis coming in at minus 105. Israel Adesanya coming in at minus 115. This line has kind of been, minus 120 Adesanya, plus 100 du Plessis. It's kind of just been going up and down roughly in that range. But I'm often seeing Adesanya as a slight favorite no matter where this line ends up going. We'll start up on the du Plessis side, who seems to be a guy that pretty much everybody and their mother loves to fade, but he always seems to come through and end up getting his hand raised. Robert Whittaker was a big favorite against him, gets knocked out. Sean Strickland, I believe, was a slight favorite in that matchup, and he ends up getting outpointed, and du Plessis wins that fight on the scorecards. Very close fight. Strickland had a strong first round. Strickland had a strong fifth round, but was unable to get much of established control and dominance and success in the second, third, or fourth rounds. Du Plessis is a guy that's largely relied on his physical abilities to get his hand raised, from the big power that he brings to the table to his ability to just crash the pocket and land big shots against his opponents, just as what was successful for him against Sean Strickland. I think at a certain point in that fight against Strickland, du Plessis kind of just realized that the shots that Strickland was landing was not going to be too effective against him, so he just continuously pressured Strickland and then crashed the pocket with big shots. And even though most of those shots weren't landing the cleanest, the optics of him continuously moving forward and landing those strikes ended up playing in favor to the judges, and that's why, optically speaking, the judges probably thought that du Plessis deserved to win that fight. Du Plessis' ground game hasn't, a slick submission game if he needs it. Can be taken down himself, but he's showing some improvements in that realm. But I think the large part of his success has been with his striking and looking to implement that power against his opponents and either knock them out, drop them, record some knockdowns, or at least make it look good optically on the score or in the judge's eyes, so that if fights do end up going to the scorecards, which are not often for du Plessis, I think only 2 or 3 of his 23 fights have gone to the scorecards. That's how he's trying to win these fights. Now, Adesanya. You're talking about a guy who has been one of the most active fighters in recent years, and as a champion. He had 9 fights in the span of 2.5 years, less than 2.5 years when he was champion, when he lost the title, won the title. And I think the time off that he wanted after that fight and that loss to Sean Strickland was more than warranted. And his ability to get an immediate title shot or rematch after that fight as well, more than warranted, considering everything that he did for the UFC and the kind of champion that he was, staying active and giving any and everybody the opportunity to fight for gold. So I'm very intrigued to see what kind of Adesanya that we're going to get coming into this weekend, now that he's a little bit more rested, has a little bit more time to finally work on some of the skills that he might have been lacking on, and more importantly, getting the rest that he deserved. We know what he is best at. That's utilizing his technical striking advantage to pick apart opponents, utilizing traps, game plans, and springing them on his opponents and getting them out of there or outpointing them and winning the fights on the scorecards. I think his fight against Sean Strickland was a wake-up call for him, and the fact that Strickland has some very weird and awkward defense that allowed Strickland to kind of just walk Adesanya down and land his output. And similarly to, du Plessis having the success that he had against Strickland with the optics of moving forward and landing some damage, he did the same thing to Adesanya, although I think Strickland's performance against Adesanya was more convincing than du Plessis' performance against Strickland, because Strickland was actually landing some shots and hurt Adesanya a few times. I think we're going to see a little bit more pop and power from Adesanya, and it's going to be a little bit easier to hit du Plessis, who's definitely there to be hit. And like I said, he did not give Strickland the respect that Strickland kind of gets from most of his opponents, which allowed du Plessis to just crash the pocket without too much to worry about in terms of what's coming back his way. But with Adesanya, I think we're going to see a little bit more pop. I think we're going to see a little bit more volume. I think we're going to see maybe even take the approach that he took in the Paulo Costa fight by landing the calf kick and landing some big shots on du Plessis. That's going to cause du Plessis to slow down, and then from there Adesanya can start countering him effectively, landing some big shots of his own, and possibly even putting du Plessis out. I think we're going to see a very revitalized version of Adesanya this weekend, and I think that's ultimately going to lead to him getting his hand raised again and earning the middleweight title once again, I believe now for the third time, and I think it eventually comes by knockout. This should be a fun fight. Fight week should be great in terms of entertainment and the trash talk back and forth. But I think the more skilled fighter will show itself here. And I think it's going to be Adesanya. And I think it comes by knockout. And new, once again, Israel Adesanya. There you guys go. Breakdowns for UFC 305, the pay-per-view for August. Very much looking forward to this card. Can't wait to see how all this plays out. Reminder, there will be a PFL breakdown coming to you guys either on Wednesday or Thursday, so keep your eyes peeled for that. I will have ACA written breakdowns on the MMALOTN Patreon page. Otherwise, I'll see you guys throughout the week for the regularly scheduled programming and segments that I drop on the channel. Hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace.